So the pandemic rages on, and it's clear to me that we are going through the stages of grief. We have denial, we have anger, we have depression, we have bargaining, and somewhere, somehow, on some distant horizon, there's acceptance. But it's so clear to me that we are just like lost in this cycle of grief, and maybe you've never heard this before, but those stages of grief, which I'm a big believer in, and I think they're very helpful, but they're not really stages, right? You can be simultaneously in denial and anger. I mean, those go together really well. You can be in the throes of depression and also be bargaining. I mean, they're very fluid, and you can kind of come in one and out the other and have a foot in both, in more than one. It's just kind of the way life is. Humans, as humans, we deal with problems in kind of a messy way. But clearly right now, I think anger it's not any news to you that anger is a big part of how we're dealing with and experiencing this pandemic. And I think that if you look at history, it's not like we shouldn't have seen it coming. I think when something drastic happens to a society, there's a huge upheaval of anger, and I really think that is partially due to grief. Some of the things that make us angry are bad things that should develop some anger in us. But I think the heightened sense of anger and the difficulty with which we control that anger is really a part of just, we're all experiencing grief. We're having a moment of national grief, of world grief. Now, when I think about that anger, though, and I'm making this video to try and encourage us to deal with our anger in a different way, because the common sense, the natural inclination is to take your anger and to find somebody to project that anger on, to find a person or a group. And it's helpful when it's somebody you don't know, and that way you don't feel bad about being angry, you don't feel bad about having outbursts towards those people. And that's why social media is such a breeding ground for this sort of anger and for these sorts of outbursts and outlets of our negative emotions, is because we don't see the body language when we hurt someone's feelings. We don't see and recognize the pain that we've caused somebody else when we type things into comment sections. But I want to encourage you to think of your anger in a different way, and to try and process your anger in a different fashion. To use your anger as a stepping stone towards acceptance, because that's where we all have to get, is to accept the reality as it is, and to learn to live a full and satisfying life in the arms of God and our family and our friends and our churches and our society, with things as they are. And that's difficult and it's painful, but it's a process that we have to go on. And I think Jesus gives us an amazing guide for how to push through that anger in a healthy way, and help us to use the anger as part of our process for overcoming the grief. The particular passage that I'm thinking of is in both Luke chapter 6 and Matthew chapter 5. I'm reading from Matthew, starting in verse 43. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. You know, what would it look like to take that group that you've projected your anger onto? What would it look like to take that person that's driving you crazy and to spend 7 days praying for that person? Now, I'm not talking about to just transfer your emotional outbursts that you would write online or you would give to some friend that you can trust, and giving that to God and just saying, this person drives me crazy, and praying that kind of prayer. I'm asking you to pray for good things for that person or that group. I'm asking you to lift that person up in prayer in a way that allows you to ruminate and saturate within God's deep and abiding love and God's deep and abiding desire to live eternally with that person that you're angry with that person who you feel is robbing you of the ability to live in this world, in this reality. I'm asking you to take that challenge. 7 days. 7 days. It can be a one-sentence prayer, but see if it does not help you ease some of the tension in your body, ease some of the tension in your mind and in your heart, and take some steps away from the anger and towards acceptance. To take some steps away from the anger that diminishes the value and the reality of the person that you might hurt with that anger, and allows you to reinvest in the love of God that is spread wide for all creation, for all humanity, and is on offer all day, all the time, 24/7 to the absolute worst of us. Because I think we're going to find a lot more fruit and a lot more goodness and a much better society and a much better world and a much better church and much better families if we can lift people up in prayer and be reminded of God's deep and abiding love for that person that's driving us crazy. So those are my words, those are my 2 cents for this moment of anger and this moment that we're experiencing as we cycle through some of these stages of grief, as we learn to accept what is this pandemic. Take care.